So there's big impacts in a magnitude of ways. This homelessness and social disorder is just the most visual, right? So I drive down the corridor on any given day. I get a call in my office, whatever, I'm going down. We are moving people along from businesses. We are cleaning up, crack pipes every day. We've removed almost 5,000 pounds of trash between downtown and the Tronquil Corridor in the last 6 months. We've returned $66,000 worth of shopping carts. We picked up, 2,000 foils. Like, the numbers are massive. But the challenge is nothing seems to be getting done.
You're watching and listening to the Crisis Storm, the podcast about homelessness, about mental health, about an increase in crime, and the impacts on communities like ours here in Kamloops and other cities around the world. Today, we're going to be talking in our second episode about the impacts of homelessness, mental health, and addictions on business and the economy here in Kamloops. And here today, I have Jeremy Heighton. Jeremy is the executive director of the Kamloops Northshore Business Improvement Association. Jeremy has quite a background from providing business coaching and business development services around the globe for over 30 years. His background includes public administration, leadership development, business coaching development, and international community sustainability projects. Jeremy, thank you for joining us in the studio here today.
It's always my pleasure.
Awesome. I know I did a little bit of a quick introduction here, but maybe we could just start off with tell us a little bit more about who Jeremy Heighton is.
Well, on my LinkedIn profile, I think it says I'm a hopeful community champion. So the reality is, when I joined the BIA in 2018, the first question I asked the board was, what do we want to be? Do we want to do community events and some marketing and PR, which is a core function of BIAs, or do we want to be a community leader? And they told me they want to be a community leader, which really fits well for me, because I think that one of the challenges we face in community is there is a lot of bandwidth for dissension, for disinformation, for people who don't have the time to dig into the situation that they're addressing, but seem to have a lot of capacity to talk about it online, sometimes anonymously, sometimes not. As a BIA, I would say that in the last 40 years almost now, the roles have changed significantly. So BIAs, as I say, were marketing, promotions, events, PR type stuff. Actually around North America, we just had a regional conference for international development associations out of the States and BIAs of Western Canada just a few weeks ago in Victoria. And one of the topics we discussed was the evolution of BIAs into community leadership, into advocacy work, into community safety, into economic development, all of these different facets that really are part of the fabric, the texture of our communities. And so we at the Northshore BIA have really stepped strongly into that space. While we have no legal mandate, we also are very aware that we need to still be at the table. We need to influence decision makers. We need to be part of the solution, not just part of the complaint about the problem. So we've really strategically moved it forward. I often say that this situation we are in now is not a foot race. We're not in a marathon. We're actually in a chess game. And we need to think in terms of strategy. What can we do around prosecutorial systems? What can we do around criminal code shifts? What can we do around decriminalization and a lack of healthcare to support that decriminalization? What do we do? There's all these pieces. And the challenge is, for most people who look at these kind of situations we're in, and I've already launched into the topic, obviously, but for a lot of people who are involved in this conversation, they're like, well, let's just ship them to the island, or let's just ship them to somewhere else, or let's just put them in a camp out of town. But chaos is opportunity in raw form. And so right now what we are seeing is the realization of 30 to 40 years of public policy implementation which has begun to crumble the system we operate on. And regardless of where you are in North America, our systems are based on voluntary compliance. And when people do not voluntarily comply, in most systems, we don't know what to do. We don't know how to react. We don't know how to respond. And so our challenge at the BIA is, how do we help people move forward? How do we counter misinformation? How do we temper anger? How do we move in a concerted and intelligent way forward without beating our partners up, and instead building relationships that build stronger community? And it crosses so many aspects of government and community and social provision, and all of these pieces. We have to learn that it is indeed overwhelming, but it can also be achieved if we work strategically together and actually understand whose role is what and how do we move forward in each of those roles. So there's a whole bunch in this topic that really comes to play. And the reality is the BIA, in my opinion, right now, are the neutral party. We're the ones who are trying to facilitate, mediate, discuss, move things forward, because we don't have an entrenched role. We are instead the collectors of community opinion and trying to move people forward.
What a fantastic introduction.
Okay.
Thank you.
No worries. A little bit more than you were expecting.
Well, way more than I was expecting, but that's great. But I want to just roll things back a little bit.
Absolutely.
Can we start with, what exactly do you define as the crises in our community where you see impacts on business and the economy?
Right. So on the North Shore specifically, I would say really from the 200 to the 400 block of Tronquil predominantly, we have had issues since the mid-1970s, right? We had red light districts, we've had gang issues, we've had all sorts of challenges in that area. So the North Shore is not new to social disruption. What is new to us is the compounding issues on top of each other: the lack of healthcare, the lack of housing, the lack of complex care supports, the lack of bandwidth and capacity. So from a business perspective, we were to pull that back and say, what's the impact? We do a survey every year. It's called Impacts, and we'll be doing our next one in the fall of 2023. But last year, we went out and we polled downtown and North Shore businesses, and we said, what are the impacts to you? And it's the standard stuff, community safety issues, lack of perception of safety, clients expressing concerns about coming into businesses because there is such mental health issues that are open on the streets. And so we said, from a numbers perspective, what does it look like for you? And so what businesses told us, specifically on Tronquil Road and downtown core, was they have lost $1 million in the prior year to vandalism costs, direct theft, other impacts to sales, all of those types of things. And then they've also spent 1.2 to 1.7 million.
This is on each business?
No, collectively.
Okay.
And they've also spent about between 1.4 and 1.7 million, depending on where you draw the lines, on crime prevention. Gates and cameras and security systems and security services and all of those other things. Now that's not the issue. Well, it is the issue, but it's so much more than that, because from a business perspective, you now have a minimum wage which is tied to the cost of inflation. So that this year has increased most wage profiles for businesses 7% if you talk to the government. So 7% at the minimum wage level is not just 7% at the minimum wage level. If you have a supervisor who's paid 50 cents more an hour, they're going to have to go up 7%, just like everyone else. So that trigger alone, if you had 13 staff at $20 an hour, actually puts you into the $500,000 a year health employer tax bracket. So the minimum wage increase at 20 employees adds $50,000 to your bottom line. The health employer tax adds about $48,000 to your bottom line. The price of gas, piped gas into for your heating systems, 11%. If you're running a restaurant, food costs are up 42%. So you add not just the cost of crime prevention and criminality and the criminal activity, but now you add the cost of inflationary pressures, and business is underwater. I was at a city of Kamloops budget meeting just fairly recently, and one of the business owners who was at that meeting and I were talking about it, this year will cost them $100,000 more than last year to operate. $100,000. And if you're running a 2% margin on $1 million, organization, why are you doing it? Right? Why are you even there? So this is one piece of massive, and some people would tell you an attack on business, but it's a massive pressure on business to re-innovate, to redefine, to reassess. And it's just one more thing that business has to deal with, which in fact is not their responsibility to deal with. And so these impacts are cumulative. So business is under tremendous pressure right now, and we are seeing a tenuous balance of businesses remaining in operation. We've seen a lot of them in Vancouver start to go under quite rapidly this spring. We expect that will continue to go. Now, typically in a marketplace, you'll see somewhere between 5 and 15% attrition every year anyway, but we could see as much as 20%, maybe 25%, based on the current operating environment. It is very defined this year. So there's big impacts in a magnitude of ways. This homelessness and social disorder is just the most visual, right? So I drive down the corridor on any given day. I get a call in my office, whatever, I'm going down. We are moving people along from businesses. We are cleaning up, crack pipes every day. We've removed almost 5,000 pounds of trash between downtown and the Tranquil Quarter in the last 6 months. We've returned $66,000 worth of shopping carts. We picked up, 2,000 foils. Like, the numbers are massive. But the challenge is nothing seems to be getting done, right? There is no movement. So what ends up happening is a business owner, you say, well, okay, we're gonna come and help you, then what? They're gonna be back tomorrow, and they're gonna be back the day after that, and the day after that, and the day after that. And the criminality is the visual piece. The psychosis is the visual piece. But there are a lot of people on the street who just can't afford anything. If you're on PWD, you receive $375 a month for housing. Okay, my brother-in-law just found a basement bedroom with a shared kitchen and bathroom for $1,000. Right, shared space for $1,000. How do we expect people who are in active addiction or mental health crisis or whatever, how do we expect them to pay rent? How do we expect them to pay rent and eat? We've built this social construct over the last 30 years, which has placed people in a position which is untenable. But the problem is, undue hardship on people in this situation is also undue hardship for the community. And government has been slow to respond.
The adverse to that, those with, I'm not one of them, but we want to be fair and impartial. We want to be unbiased. We want to bring everyone to the table for this discussion. Right. So I have to understand that there are people out there with compassion fatigue.
Oh yeah.
That are just done, that have been impacted themselves so much. Some business owners.
Absolutely.
Who are at the point, after so many years and after their families being in jeopardy, that they're saying these are decisions those people made to be in that situation.
Absolutely.
And if they don't fall in line, round them up and do something about them.
Absolutely.
So what do you say to that?
That's not the solution.
Why is it not the solution?
Because the reality is, and I'll use this term and it's kind of crass, but it's accurate. We're playing Wack-A-Mole. We're just moving people from point to point to point to point to point to point every single day. We're not addressing the systemic failures. If we can't keep an emergency room open in most of our communities, we certainly don't have the capacity to provide robust mental health treatment, right? Let's be honest. The entire Interior Health Authority, in my opinion, is broken. This region, even more so than down in the coast, where we hear about it all the time. We have written to the president of the Interior Health and received no response back as a business community. 11 organizations signed a letter last October. We didn't even get the courtesy of an acknowledgement. They won't come to the table. They'll do little things which they can, we can do this and we can pop that in there and we can pop that in there. But systemically, the system is so dysfunctionally broken that it doesn't matter what we do, we're just moving people until we approach the problem in a different way. And that's what we're trying to do. We as a business association are saying, we don't want to be the complainers. We don't want to be the guys that are sitting here saying, get these guys out of here, come on, let's. Instead, we want to say, how do we help? How do we assist? So about 2.5 years ago, I began writing letters. And so we wrote letters, and the opening line of one letter was, we own these effing streets. And that's what one of our property owners was told by some guys who had just broken his window, stole his cash box while they were still on his property. We own these effing streets. And that's what I started the letter with. Well, it got a lot of attention, right? So it went to, federally, it went to Minister of Health and the Attorney General. Provincially, it went to the Attorney General, Minister of Social Development, on and on, BC Housing, locally, it went, of course, to the mayor and council. And we started having these conversations. I'm like, well, hang on a second. Why do they own these streets? What is it about this situation? And how do we turn this around so that, yes, we get that there's a lot of compassion fatigue, as you note. Yes, there's a lot of issues here, but how do we move this forward? How do we move the needle on this? And the reality is, even when decriminalization came in, I wrote an article about it. I actually posted about it. And I said, this decriminalization sounds good on the surface. Let's decriminalize drugs. It's great. We're not going to take them away. We're going to let them use them. There's no criminal interaction. We're based on that. A lot of people say that gets you closer to the Portugal model. But it doesn't. The Portugal model, drugs are decriminalized, but they're still criminal. So if you're actually using drugs in Portugal, you are sent to a tribunal. And the tribunal adjudicates you. And the first thing they do is they say, you will go for treatment. And there are something like 34 regional health centers, 17 complex care centers, like a massive health infrastructure underneath the system. So the first time,
when you say they will go to treatment,
they will. They are mandated to treatment. They are directed to treatment, which is somewhere where the province here has said we won't go. We won't do involuntary.
They're incarcerated for the purpose of treatment.
Yeah, I mean, I would say institutionalized for the purpose of treatment, because you have to, that's the challenge, like the IH model is clinical, it's 30 days, right? But the reality is you actually need much more than that, because once you're detoxed, now you got to work on the things that got you there. The PTSD and the, all the other issues that people lose along the way, their ability to deal with. So the Portugal model is you have a robust system and you're in until you're out. And once you're out, you have a plan. And if you violate that plan, you go back in front of the tribunal again. And then the tribunal has actually a series of penalties. They can take away your professional credentials. They can send you to prison. They can fine you. Like there's all of these other mechanisms that they can use to reinforce getting people into the health continuum. Here we say, decriminalized, keep your drugs, have a good time. Oh, the other thing is, in Portugal, they seize the drugs. Here we leave them. You just keep using them. And so the problem is we've created a piece over here, but the healthcare system isn't there. We created a piece over there, but the housing system isn't there. So this is it. Like, what's sexy, what's shiny.
Siloed.
Everything's siloed. And this year I'm hearing for the first time ever that the provincial government has been mandated by the Premier to work across organizations. So hopefully that will come. And we've seen in the last 3 years a massive change in the language that the Premier is using now. When I met with him a number of years ago, involuntary care was not even in his vocabulary. Not even in the wheelhouse. And yet now he's talking about it. I mean, he's talking about it for repeat violent criminal offenders, absolutely. But then my question back that I haven't got an answer to is, what is violence? Is violence psychological? Is violence physical? How do we define violence? What does that violence look like? What are these special prosecutorial systems that he's talking about setting up? What are they going to look like? Are they anonymous? Are they local? So you understand who the players are. There's a bunch of pieces. And this is it. We're sort of cobbling together solutions as we go. So what we've done is, from the BIA perspective, is we've shifted. We've gone a different direction. So what we've done, about 2 years ago, I started talking to agency in town. Because I realized that agency gets beaten up. Whether it's Bob, who gets beaten up publicly for this or that, or whether it's Alfred, or all these great guys who are doing great work.
Ask Wellness and CMHA.
Ask and CMHA, yeah. And the reality is, if those guys weren't here, if their teams weren't here doing their work they're doing, what would we do with those 600, 800 people who were in care, in housing, in supported programming? Where would they be? They'd be on the streets. Like, we can't beat each other up if we're trying to resolve the situation. We have to work together. We have to figure out how to address systemic problems, but then also how to be creative and innovative. So we've done two things. So 2 years I started talking with a number of agencies and with the government about the Clean Team, which we launched last September. So the Clean Team,
for those that don't know, the Clean Team.
the Clean Team is people who are either in housing or in care with one of our agency partners, CMHA, Smart Options, Ask Wellness, Mustard Seed, whatever. And they are people who are in care of those organizations, who are in the healing process, trying to get back on their feet. And what we do is we partner with them to launch the Clean Team. So the Clean Team go around, they pick up garbage, they do interface landscaping, they paint graffiti out of the city, all those kind of things. So there's a number of objectives or outcomes for me. Number one, it's an opportunity to destigmatize people in housing and care. Because a lot of folks in housing and care are really trying their best every single day. So we need to acknowledge that there are people who have value, and they add value to community if they're given the opportunity. Number two, because $375 doesn't cut it, what we do is we employ them throughout the course of an entire year on the Clean Team. And we pay them the equivalent of $15,000 in the year. And the reason we...
Each person?
Each person. And the reason we peg it at $15,000 in the year is that is the maximum allowable income that that individual can make if they're on PWD, for example, without negative consequence.
Right.
So there's lots of people out there like, well, pay them 25 or 26 bucks an hour. But if you exceed that $15,000, you actually have to pay that back to the government. Or if it's far enough over, they can suspend your actual benefits, which is actually giving you the base upon which to stand upon to get moving forward, right? So we've structured it to pay $15,000. That's our cap. So we've doubled their income. We give them an opportunity to come and work with us and contribute back to community. And one of our guys who was on CBC a little while ago, Dwayne, actually said, you know, when I was a drunk, and this is what he said. He said, when I was a drunk, I took, and I took, and I took. He said, this is my opportunity to give back. And that's a powerful statement. So the people in this program have a connection point. They can start to come together and work with other people. We can give them real-time employment coaching. Get to work on time. How do you communicate with other people in your workplace when you don't agree? You know, what's basic functionality? How do we make you more palatable to an employer? And then ultimately, we work with agencies so that if somebody falls off the wagon, so to speak, if they're, you know, in a recovery process, that's not a termination point for their employment. That's an expectation, right? Because people in recovery will fall 6, 7, 8 times in some cases. So the problem with most employment programs that the government offers is they're 12-week windows, maybe 16-week windows. So as you move through that window, if you have a stumble as somebody who's in housing or in care, basically employment's over. You have no time to recover. We say we want to employ them for the entire year. So if you stumble, no big. You get back on your feet. When you're ready to go, we'll take you back on the Clean Team. When they stumble, their agency picks up their care. So they do the complex care, they do the PST counseling, whatever they need to do to help them get back on their feet. As soon as they're ready, they come back and they start working with us. It's really important because now there's consistency. Now there's reliability. So we've had 2 people stumble, and the first call I get from their care team is they want to know if the work's still there. They want to know if the job's still there because it's something they can hold on to. It's a sense of purpose. It may seem menial, but it's a sense of something. I got to go somewhere. I got to be somewhere. I have responsibilities while I'm there. I'm treated respectfully by the team. You know what I mean? There's something there for people, and that's hugely valuable to me.
So this program, how many people do you have in it in total? Or how many
right now we have 4. We can go up to 8. We're actually pursuing a research and innovation grant with the province of BC. So our goal is to fund the program for 3 years. And so what we do is people come into the program and they're in level 1. And level 1, quite frankly, is garbage pickup, needle pickup, you know, sharps pickups, those kind of things. And the reason for that is in that level 1, we want to get people thinking about, can I show up on time? How do I get to a job? Like the core functions which many of these folks have lost. And then, you know, like I say, the core communication. Can I take direction? What happens if I disagree? Like, what do we do? How do we work together? So we're the director of work. NSBI is the director of work. Technically, the agency is still the employer because they have all the wraparound services, right? So in tier one, frankly, if we have people for 6 months, we're doing assessment in that full 6 months. So we have one of our guys who came to us, who is an Indigenous male in mid-30s, came with all of the baggage that you've heard about, right? PTSD, FAS, like family trauma, residential school survival, all of that stuff, right? And so he had some rage issues. Like we would say, oh, we're gonna go over here, and he'd be like, oh, what do you mean we're going, right? And he'd just blow up because he couldn't control himself. And what was interesting is we took him through the first cohort, through the first few months, and we got to know him, and his trust was built. His rage started to come down, and when we started working with his agency partners, and so as they were starting to balance him, right? And then at about 2/3 of the way through the project, through the cohort, we're talking about mapping one day, like mapping routes. And he said, well, I can't read that. I said, why? He said, I'm dyslexic, I'm functionally illiterate. I'm like, oh, that must be really hard. Right? You presented information, and it took us 8 weeks to learn this about this individual. If you were in a 12-week program, you have no time to adapt before they're out of the program. And that's why we want them for a year. Because at 8 weeks, we go, okay, you need a different way of communicating. So let's talk about how we make that work for you moving forward. So that 6-month first tier is really about assessment, the individual. What are they bringing? What are their strengths? What are their barriers? How do we work them through these things from an employer perspective? Level 2, at the next 6 months, is graffiti removal, interscape landscaping, those kind of things, because level 2 requires self-work, some discipline to be by yourself, equipment use, some more technical skills. And the goal is to keep them in skill 2 for another 6 months. So at the end of a year, what happens is this person walks away from a program where they've basically been on their feet for a year. They've had all the wraparound supports. We've helped them on the employment side. And a potential employer looks at a resume, and instead of saying, 4 or 3 or 4, 12 or 16-week temporary jobs, he sees a year of steady employment. He sees a person who's in the clean team who's actually got their life back on track. That person looks way more employable. It's a whole different perspective on the back end for the employer. But then we also have level 3. So at the end of a year, if you've gotten through level 1 and level 2, we'll make you a team leader. We'll give you supervisory skills training. We'll help you to develop yourself even more and take you through another 6-month process. So literally from start to finish, it could be 18 months, but you've gone from how do I function in the workplace to being a leader in the workplace. And that is the power of that story.
This sounds phenomenal.
It's
How long has it been running?
So it was interesting because one of the challenges we run into with agency is they have no money, right? That everybody's running on a shoestring, and I get that. So what happened was last August, I was talking to Bob Hughes, and I said, Bob, look, I've been trying for 2 years to get this program off the ground. We're not connecting with the right people. We were heading into end of fiscal for the province, and Bob said, you know what? We're winding down the mattress recycling. We have a workplace opportunities grant. Take it and use it. He said, use it for the next 6 months and see what we can do. And so that's where we started. We started with this 6-month workplace opportunities grant from Ask Wellness, and we brought people in and started working with them. This spring, we started working ourselves, and the cities come to the table and helped us with, they've contributed a truck, they help us pay for consumable supplies. People are coming to the table because they're like, this is what we want. Because what you said earlier, compassion fatigue is set in. But as soon as you give somebody something to glom onto, they're all over it. Our members are like, how do we make this go? How do we keep this going? Because we want people to thrive. We want people to rise. We want people to be successful in their lives. And if we have a mechanism to do it, let's go. That's what our members think.
It sounds great, but I don't want to be the naysayer.
No, it's fine.
But 8 people, does that even make a dent?
Maybe. So you have to remember, and this is one of the conversations we have quite frequently with our partners, is there are people, just like on the street, in housing and in care, there are people at a variety of levels, right? Our goal is to take people who are on their feet, but not fully on their feet. They're emerging, right? So what happens is you have, for lack of better terminology, low barrier doors, right? So you have people in housing who are trying to get a handle on their addictions, trying to look for alternate therapies, trying to figure out how to function day to day. Those aren't people for Clean Team. But people who have been able to thrive in that environment and move to the next level, where they're now looking for what's my purpose, how do I move forward, those are my Clean Team people. right? So what I do is I take those people and I help them to get to the next level. Because at the end of this 18 months, my goal is to get you a real job, a full-time job, so that you can earn full-time income, so that you can be independent and you can move forward on your own life. So we're taking people out of a slice of the continuum is what we're doing. But we're not separating them. Like most traditional employment is not connected to agency. So employment's over here, healthcare's over here. We're connected. So if I have a problem with one of my people, I pick up the phone and talk to the person responsible at the agency and say, this is the problem we're having with so-and-so. What can we do about this? Oh, let's get them into counseling, or let's call them in and have a meeting, or whatever we need to. But that's the difference, is we're partners in the process. We're leading people through a segment of their journey. And the goal is to create the best foundation we can in that segment so that as they move forward, they're on firm footing. That's our goal. We can't take everybody. That's just not the way it builds. So our goal now is Northshore. We have our goal as we move forward is to have 4 in the North Shore, 4 downtown, and if we do get an East Kamloops BIA, which we're working on right now, 4 in East Kamloops. So I have 12. But we have to be cautious. We only have so much capacity in this golden band which we're involved with. So we have to be careful as well, because if we go too big, we actually don't have the capacity for that in the housing continuum based on the way it's set. Because there's a lot of people in our housing continuum who are fully gainfully employed, but are there because the housing is too expensive, right? So we have to sort of really break it apart and figure out where it fits. And for us, it's sort of that next step up once you started to get your feet under you and are starting to build your foundation. Those are the people we're aiming for. So when you start looking at 12 people in that continuum, you're probably looking at 20% of who's there right now in housing in that space.
Okay. Before we go to break here for a sec, I want to ask you one more question.
Okay.
I want to roll it back again just for a second.
Yeah.
I should have asked this at the beginning. These crises that we're facing right now. I know we don't want to focus on the negative, but people need to understand. So from your perspective, if left unchecked,
yes,
if we don't address the homelessness, the mental health, the rise in crime, the addictions issues, all of these crises that we're facing, where does that lead us? What does this look like in 5 years' time?
So I said earlier, a crisis is an opportunity in raw form. So if we move into the space positively, then we have opportunity here to resolve it. But like all things in the universe, chaos not addressed will eat itself. Right? So the reality is we're on that tipping point. It's kind of like climate change, where we're on the tipping point. And our choice at this point is, do we move forward or do we just let it go? And if we just let it go, our societies will descend into chaos. Somebody the other day said it is the erosion of civil society that we are watching today, and it is mainstream. We saw it yesterday in, Donald Trump's thing. We see it in politics. We see it on Facebook. It is the erosion of civil society as we know it. And we have an opportunity here to either step into the space or to watch it slide.
That's fantastic. I've got a lot more questions for you. We're going to ask them right after these messages. We'll be right back.
We live in a world of conversations about life and survival. On a daily basis, mankind continually seeks a way to make our human experience better on all levels. We seek a way forward. Permit me to invite you to one of such conversations happening right here in Kamloops. On the 22nd of September 2023, a prestigious event will be held. AIM Canada Mentorship Society and Mastermind Studios are putting together a special fundraising dinner towards the production of a documentary film series titled Finding a Way Forward. The documentary series will periscope the crisis storm in our community, including homelessness, mental health, drug overdose, crime, and communication breakdown. Guest speaker is the Executive Director of the Canadian Mental Health Association in Kamloops, Mr. Alfred Achoba. Music will be provided by the virtuoso himself, Jeremy Heighton. You will also witness a thought-provoking art installation titled Not All Dolls Live in Houses from the talented Isa Jessica Jordan. Don't miss out on the mouth-watering dinner, which will be a Greek buffet with vegan options and lots of refreshments to nourish us. Bring your family, neighbors, bring your friends to this fundraising dinner in support of community mentorship and the development of a Kamloops focused documentary film series to find a way forward. Date again is Friday, 22nd of September, 2023. Venue is the Kamloops United Church. Doors open at 5:30 p.m. for a 6 p.m. start. Limited tickets available, so grab yours today. To get tickets, go to www.aimcanadalegacyfund.ca/events. For ourselves, our children, our community, let's find a way forward together.
Have you ever considered launching a professional video podcast? Or creating a video-based interview, but felt daunted by the task? You may have wondered how to begin, how many cameras you need, who to interview, what to say, what kind of film set do you need, lighting, sound, what editing to use, and how to attract viewers or listeners. Did you know that Mastermind Studios can produce 4 to 8 video podcast shows in a single day, complete with recording, editing, and distribution? Contact us now for your free consultation. Let's explore the possibilities. We can work together to turn your maybe into a resounding yes. Give me a call. Mastermindstudios.ca. Give us a call right now. 250-574-6902. Welcome back to the Crisis Storm. We're here with Jeremy Heighton from the Northshore Business Improvement Association, and we are talking about impacts on business and the economy from the crises that we're facing in community. Don't forget, if you are getting something out of what you're watching and listening to with the Crisis Storm, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the Crisis Storm with other people. So, Jeremy, we had a little bit of a discussion on break, just for everyone. If you could share with us, we were talking about how the population breaks down.
Right.
Can you break down this marginalized population of homeless people, of people dealing with mental health issues? What does that look like?
So from our perspective, and again, Alfred may have a slightly different perspective and Bob may have, different perspectives. Realistically, we see a number of layers. It's like all things, right? We can brushstroke a broad brushstroke of a population, but in reality, we need to break it down. So there are people who are, just at the crisis point, they're actively in addiction, they have very little capacity to function outside of their addictions. Absolutely, totally get it. There should be complex care for those people. There are people who are functionally addicted, maybe, right? So there should be complex care for them as well. But they are people who, you see wandering around quite often. They may be in social groups or whatever. You see people who are in mental health crisis. We see quite a few of those on our streets. That mental health crisis may be PTSD related, it could be head injury related, it could be addictions related, we don't know, right? So there's a whole bunch of layers here as we start to move through it. Once you get into the mental health, you then get into sort of what I call the predator populations, right? So the drug dealers who we see active on our streets at any given time, people coordinating theft for profit. Ultimately, it's to fund addictions, typically, right? So there are criminals and violent criminals, and then there's even gangs, right, that are associated and aligned with the street populations. So there's all these different levels of people on the street. And so one of the questions, and we sort of we talked about this on break, is the challenge with this is, because the system is dysfunctional, the system has no accountability on a criminal side, it has no capacity on the health side. What ends up happening is many cases, like we've got on the Tronquil Road at a specific site, cycle out of control, right? They just cycle. So last year, before we fenced the back alley in 400 block, there were 50 people at any given time there. It was chaotic all day, every day. And so when you go back to the very beginnings, the origins of community as a social concept, the premise is based on the fact that we come together for mutual benefit. We come together to share resources. We come together to have safety in numbers. We come together and we create a construct which is based on fairness, which is based on a balance of systems. What we see right now perceptually in community is there is no balance. There is no fairness in the system. I, as a business owner, spend $15,000, $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 a year in property taxes, but I'm lucky if I can get an RCMP officer to respond. I may be able to get a CSO to respond. I have no accountability for somebody who has just, robbed my store, typically, because they're turned loose for whatever reason. So this concept of fairness, as I said earlier, is eroding in community. So if you look at the BC Prosecutorial Guidelines, there's two sides to the coin. Side number one is undue hardship for the individual. And we saw a decision come out of the Supreme Court a number of years ago. There's three key decision processes from the Supreme Court. Basically what the decision said was the life history of Indigenous males or Indigenous peoples must be considered when you look at sentencing. So the totality of their life history. And how does that influence where they are today? We don't want to create any more undue hardship. Totally great concept. It's been broadly applied across the, in my opinion, judicial spectrum. And there are people now who have 100, 200 interactions with RCMP a year, and there's no consequence because of the undue hardship it would cause them. The other side of the prosecutorial coin is community interest. And my assertion to Crown prosecutors over the last 2 years is, if you create a situation where undue hardship for the individual is the primary consideration, you should not be creating undue hardship for the community that person is within. So there must be a health system. Perhaps it's involuntary care on their detox to get them started. Incarceration in some cases, depending upon the type of infractions that we have. Like, there needs to be balance in the system. Because if I, as somebody who is trying to contribute voluntarily to the betterment of a society, have no power, have no fairness, how does that support the evolution of our community? It doesn't. So this is where we come back to the complexity of the underlying problem, which is individuals are responding right now, or are living in an environment that began 30 years ago, a social policy paradigm which began 30 years ago. And it started with the closure of mental health beds. I get it, Nurse Ratched, the whole one flew over the cuckoo's nest, the abuse of individuals, blah, I hear you. And I totally appreciate the fact that we want to do it better. We want to do it, we've evolved. But that social policy decision that was made didn't take into account the pandemic, didn't take into account opioids and carfentanil and all of the complexities, didn't take into account the destruction of the social system and the erosion of healthcare. It didn't foresee those things. So now that one decision has become a complexity of other problems that we are now faced with. And so the only way you can't unravel that decision, but you can go from this point forward. It is a decision point today. And so in the business community, what we're saying is we're solvers. Business has always been innovative. It has always been sort of nimble. Oh, we have an issue? How do we deal with that issue? What's been done before? Let's learn from that. Let's throw some spaghetti at the wall. And what we're saying as business is, we want to help you get there. So let us in. Let us help you. Let us guide you. Let us be supports to you. Let us help fund some things like the Clean Team. Let us look for solutions which are innovative and creative, and let's work together to get there. But those other partners have to come to the table. They have to be involved in the conversation. They have to be willing to listen. And we're very fortunate, I think, that we have a very strong position. We moderate and play chess every day, if you would, right? How do we move this piece forward? And who are the players at this table? And how do we get these conversations to move forward? And how do we connect these two people to have these? We're always thinking, how do we build? How do we build relationships to move forward? And what's fascinating is in our membership, you're right, there is compassion fatigue. In our community, there's passion fatigue. In council, there's compassion fatigue. Like, we're all tired. That's okay. But as soon as there's that one glimmer, you see the spark. People want to help. People want to be involved in doing it better. But government needs to listen. Government needs to be at the table, and government needs to move aside from political agendas and look at community building. And this is what I used to work for the feds many years ago. And one of the biggest frustrations I used to say was almost everything is done in a 3-year window. 6 months before an election, everything stops. Whoa, we don't want to upset the apple cart, it'll cost us votes. Then the election occurs, and then whoever gets into power takes about 6 months to get up to speed. So you've lost a year of your 4-year cycle. So now what you want to do as government is say, we got 3 years, let's get some stuff out the door, right? And we've seen a whole bunch of announcements from the provincial government recently. Quite interesting that most of them are going to take 18 months to 2 years to implement, which is post next election, but maybe that's just the cynic in me. But the reality is, instead of making decisions at government, which are 3 years, can we get some sexy, media coverage out of this? We should be saying, what do we want in 30 years from today? Let's work backwards from that. Do we want people with ability to walk in off the street right now, go through that door and get care? Or do we want a situation where we don't have emergency rooms and doctors? And for a while there, we couldn't even have a baby in Kamloops, right? Like one of the OBGYN clinics closed down. Like, there's zero healthcare capacity. Is that what we want? And how do we go about changing that? That's not a 3-year conversation. That's a 30-year conversation. What's the trajectory of this potential decision? And if that's where we want to get to, let's work it backwards. What kind of legislative time frames do we need? What kind of policy shifts do we need? What kind of political shifts do we need? What kind of community development? Those are the questions we have to start asking. Not how do we respond today? Let's open 150 new low barrier doors during the pandemic. Fantastic. We got people off the street. I applaud it. But what was the next evolution? What goes beyond the low barrier door? I was talking to Alfred about a year and a half ago. I'm like, we need a tiered housing system. Low barrier doors. Level 1, you're kind of getting on your feet. Level 2, okay, you're on your feet. What comes with that? Level 3, you know what I mean? You almost like a system to move people through.
Well, we do have a system. Most
it's
people
coming.
aren't
it's
aware
coming.
of it.
It's coming.
There's a way
coming. Yeah, it's coming.
to rank or score.
Yeah, the VAT.
The
vulnerability assessment tool. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the reality is, you're absolutely right. There is, but there's no coordinated programming. So, for example, if I'm a housing provider and I go to the provincial government, I can get housing from BC Housing. And then I have to look for, funding from Interior Health, Ministry of Health for, PTSD or trauma counseling. Or I have to look for funding so they have to go out and they have to look for funding pots. And my assertion to the province has been, why don't we build a system? Just like CLBC is for adults with developmental disabilities, Why don't we build the same system for the social paradigm? Why don't we say that if you want to open 50 units of level 1 housing, these are the services that come pre-funded with those housing units. You want people to move into level 2 where they're on their feet and they're starting to get, this is the funding that comes with each of those housing units for those individuals. And that's actually what we're building into the CLEAN team. We're building into this grant application a funding envelope for each participant of $5,000 over the course of the program. So at any point in time, the agency can come back and say, we need to get this person into crisis trauma counseling. It's going to cost $150 an hour. We have a $5,000 account for this individual. We can get them through X number of sessions, because we want to pre-fund so that we're not disconnecting service. Because outreach is an adjunct off the side of a desk. Sharps collection, adjunct off the side of the desk. Housing, is provided and kind of funded. Mental health supports, hit and miss, right? Depending on the individual and the case management. Why don't we just fund it to a level? and say, if you're going to open level 2 or level 3 or level 4, this is what comes with that housing level. And then I as a provider can go back and say, okay, so who do I have in my housing? Who's at, the base level? Who's at level 1? Let's build them up and let's give them the capacity to move forward. And what happens there is, yes, you have a higher cost at the lower end of that spectrum. You absolutely will, because it's dealing with all of this stuff, right? But as you move through the spectrum, your costs on your social infrastructure, your response teams, your housing can all start to drop off, because people begin to pick up their own lives and rely on the social service system less. So you build a paradigm, you build a continuum of care, but that requires longitudinal, long-term thinking.
So let's simplify this for people.
Yeah.
You've got because of your background, obviously, a very systemic approach to things, and you can look at systems and what the problems are and come up with the solutions. Love it. But at the end of the day, if you had to do a list of what are the barriers that we're currently facing with implementing these types of solutions, where are these barriers right now? So that people can understand.
In my opinion, the biggest single barrier is the lack of a robust health system, bar none else. Because the reality is, until we have enough capacity for people to walk in off the street. The decriminalization team from Interior Health presented at a meeting I was at, and we were talking about the rollout of the decriminalization process. It's a 3-year pilot, but the reality is, once you roll out the carpet, you never roll it back up. Like, it's not gonna happen. I said to them, if you look at all of the things going on, what is the one thing that would be the trigger to make decriminalization successful? And the response was equal or greater access to health services than there is to drugs. Because I was at a community action team meeting a couple of years ago. We had a guy walk in the door. There were 14 agencies at the table, literally around a horseshoe. The guy walked in through the door at the Parkview Activity Center while we were all sitting there and said, I'm ready, right now. We could not get him a room in less than 3 weeks. 14 agencies around the table, 0 capacity. That guy walked out the door. I have no idea what ever happened to him. That to me is a tragedy. That to me is incomprehensible. That if we want to deal with this problem, we have to look at it and say, what is missing? And complex healthcare is missing, period.
So when you said a robust healthcare system is the single biggest thing that we need.
Absolutely.
Are you including in that mental health?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So complex healthcare is about all of the aspects, right? The reality is, you've got people dealing with just PTSD. And that seems kind of simple, but it's like, wow, PTSD is a massive issue, right? Past trauma, inability to resolve, et cetera, et cetera. You have people dealing with addictions, whole different process, because it actually rewires your brain chemistry. It changes your physiological functioning. There's medical aspects to it. There's psychological aspects to it. There's psychosis that comes with it, like very complicated stuff. And then as you move through that paradigm, dependent upon how long you've either been street entrenched or addicted, there are physical health issues, right? Organs don't work as well. A lot of people I talk to have, COPD or asthma or other concurrent health issues which have been triggered by years of abuse, years of heavy abuse of your body, environmentally or otherwise. So the complex care is about a massive redesign of the healthcare system. And while we're at it, let's talk about how we attract doctors and nurses and how we identify foreign credentials. Reid, our mayor, was at the Chamber of Commerce, and he was speaking about the state of the city. And he said in that speech, I believe it was, the state of our basically the way I was listening to it, it sounded like we were in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. And I'm like, oh my God, this sounds horrible, right? And he said at one point, he said, that's why nurses and doctors won't come here. And I was like, oh, that's really an interesting perspective. And then a nurse stood up in the audience and said, that's why nurses and doctors will come here. Because we care, we're compassionate, we're giving. We want to give, we want to create health in our communities. So as a community, how do we facilitate that? As a province, how do we turn that around? Why is healthcare in crisis across North America? well, Canada actually more specifically, the US is still doing pretty good because it's a cash-based system, but why are we having trouble identifying for credentials and moving them through that process quicker? We're starting on that process. Why do we have problems attracting, why are we poaching from each other? Like, what's going on? We're not approaching this systemically. We're not approaching this as an opportunity. We're approaching, again, as a slap the Band-Aid on it, make it look good for the politics, and what are we going to do next, right? If immigration is our pathway to a lot of what we're trying to achieve in this country, which many people will tell you, economists will tell you, then we need, what was it? I think it was something like 5 million housing units a year for the next 20 years, just to ease the pressure on the housing system. We need a healthcare system that's aligned with people coming here. And if you got a young pair of doctors just coming out of medical school, maybe they're husband, wife, maybe one's a tech or whatever, and they're a young family and they want to have a baby, will they go somewhere where you can't have a baby? Where there's no health services for hours? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, we really need to think about this in a different way. And it is the healthcare system which is the foundation of so many of our challenges. Because if it was a responsive system that had capacity, then we have somewhere to help these people go, whether they're street entrenched or lower income or just struggling to get by day, we have somewhere, we have support systems for them. So that's the key piece to me, is the health system. We need accountability, absolutely. Any system has to function with one big stick and a whole bunch of incentives, right? It's just the truth. So that has to be looked at as well. But that's secondary. We have to look at the care paradigm. And we strongly believe, I strongly believe, involuntary care is a solution. It absolutely is. But involuntary care should not be 30-day clinical models. Because as I said, if you are in heavy addiction and you go into detox and you work through that detox program, yeah, okay, you're working on your issues while you're detoxing, but at the end of 30 days, you're given the opportunity to walk. Do you still want to be here? It's a voluntary process. And here's the challenge. You are finally at a point at the end of 30 days where you're clean and sober, if you would. You've had a little bit of counseling to get you through that process, but now you're walking away of all your senses, and the baggage is still with you. Now what? What comes next? And this is where my assertion is 30-day detox is great, but it should be a 1-year life skills program or life rehabilitation program, whatever you want to call it. But 30 days is the start point. Once you walk out that door at the end of 30 days, you should have up to a year, year and a half, 2 years, whatever you need to work through the other pieces. Because now you're clean and sober and you can think it through. All that stuff's right there.
Right.
Right. The reason people are in addiction so often, apart from the chemical dependency, is to mask the trauma, is to hide, is to veil things so they don't have to deal with it. Well, now we've stripped it all that drug, euphoria away. See ya. I'm in a position where I'm like, I don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think that's the problem, is we need to look at the care paradigm in a different way, because we need to give people time to recover.
But of course,
not just time to dry
one
up.
of the barriers to that, as I understand it, is that we have legislation, we have human rights laws
Absolutely.
that prevent us from forcibly helping someone.
Absolutely. And so the response to that would be, and I've heard this many times from my members, what about my rights? I've had 43 10 break-ins in the last 6 months. The old Tim Hortons on Tronquil, 6 glass plate windows one day were broken by one individual, $18,000. Over the course of 6, where's that property owner's rights?
Yeah.
Right? Like, there has to be balance and fairness in the system. It's the core concept upon which society is built. And so from a business owner perspective, if there were consequence to action, whether that's, some way to get, not retribution, but like repayment, right, for damages, or, somebody's where they have to do community service or whatever, then okay, there's something that came out of that. Hopefully that they'll learn from that. But to just say, court's not going to convict you, so let's not even bother with charges. Okay, it just cost me 18 grand. What do you mean no charges? Well, you know, they're in addiction.
18 grand was the replacement cost, not counting the lost opportunity costs and loss of business.
Exactly.
While it was being dealt
Exactly. So this, that business owner, I mean, the reason that, you know, that's one of the reasons Tim Hortons is closed down in the middle of the, Tim Hortons, for God's sake, right? Like, it's not like it's like a Joe Blow little, you know, coffee shop. Tim Hortons closes down because there is no fairness in the system. There is no accountability. It's incredibly difficult.
We've touched on something a couple of times, but we haven't quite got there. And so I want to just come out straight and ask you. You know, you talked about social media. You talked about people's response to social media. You know, and we've talked. We've mentioned the word media a couple of times. But how about this? You know, from a business perspective, what is the role that the media is or is not playing in all of this?
That's a tough question, especially on the tail end of...
Honestly, what drives media, what pays the bills
Oh yeah,
of
sensationalism,
media
of course.
No, but it's business.
Well, of course.
Without the advertising, there is no
exactly.
media.
It's the draw which reads the advertising, which eats the revenue. Totally.
The individuals or the power to do something about media lies, I think, in the economy.
I agree.
With business owners.
I agree.
So you more than anybody have an authority to say something about the way that media is behaving in this crisis time.
Agreed.
What do you have to say about media?
We have a very strong relationship with media. So I'm on with NL probably once a month. We spend 20, 30 minutes a month, you know, talking about what's going on and how things are moving forward. We've had a lot of articles in Kamloops This Week, in Castanet, and so we work the media angle very, very, very strongly to talk about what's going on and talk about the real impacts of what's happening. The challenge with the media landscape is it's shifting so drastically now, right? Media has gone from media's original intent, and I came out of media many years ago. So media's original intent was to inform, right? That's it. Here's the two sides, you make your decision. Media today is more about opinions and editorials than it is about information. So the challenge we run into, and we see this all the time on Facebook, is one of our past mayoral candidates actually put a post up a little while ago about, you know, the Tronquil corridor is going to hell because, you know, all it's going to be is like all these drug addicts living in housing. And so what's my response to that? Well, I have two options here. I can tell them to pound sand, right, go away, or I can use it as an opportunity to educate. So because that's what I did. So I responded and I said, you know, well, this building that's going forward is for seniors. This building that's going forward is for housing, for affordability for families. This building is going forward, blah, blah, blah. So I walked through each building and what it is and why it's there and what the cosmopolitan nature of it is, because the reality is you need a variety of housing types to support your population. And densification is a good thing. You know, people are talking about this 15-minute city. It's bunk. I mean, that's the way cities started. You go back to the medieval times, cities were concentric circles. Within 15 minutes, you can get everything you needed. That's all it's about. That's really all it's about. But anyway, the housing continuum is critically important because you have to have depth to your housing continuum to create momentum and movement within your housing continuum. So you have to have your $1 million houses, and you have to have your affordable houses, and you have to have everything in between. Well, I put this post up, and it was a lengthy post, and nothing. Suddenly there was no other opinions. And that's what I find over and over again. When you go out and you educate and say, well, this is what's actually going on, and this is what this is, and this is why this functions, and this is where the problems are in the system, suddenly the people who are chirping in the background are silent. Because now what are they going to contest? They now know, right? Somebody who understands what's happening has said, this is what's happening. Here's the reality of this situation. And we see that over and over again. If you take media and you use it as an opportunity to educate, to inform in a balanced manner, then suddenly you create enlightenment. And with enlightenment, passion begins to be moderated, right? So I have a saying, passion without data is often angry. Data without passion is often boring, but data with passion creates great decisions. So we have to be able to say, yes, we're passionate. Yes, we understand there's no fairness in the system. Here's where we're at. Here's where we want to take it. Here's what you can do to help us get there. Put all the pieces together. That's what we have to do. And as business, that's one of our privileges. We are very fortunate to represent in the Northshore 423 businesses, 299 property owners. We're blessed to be able to represent them. So my goal is to move them forward as a neighborhood, as a community, together with our neighbors, our residents, to build the best possible future we can. And that includes those people who are on the street. That includes those people who are displaced. I used to talk, when I did a lot of keynotes, I used to talk about this concept of community vibrancy. And what I would say is, you walk into a castle in Ireland or Scotland or somewhere, right? You walk into the Grand Hall, and there before you are the towering, ceilings and the echoing sounds, and it's all overwhelming. And you look ahead and there's this tapestry hanging from the wall, 50 feet across and 50 feet down. And it's an amazing tapestry. And, the slaying of the dragons and the creation of the community. It's the story of the community. And you stand back and you look at it and you're like, wow, that is incredible. But as you get closer and closer to the tapestry, there's a little bit of moth-eaten. There's a little bit of burns. There's some pulled threads. There's some repairs that have been done. And those things add to the texture of the tapestry. Will our community ever be perfect? No. But we can't exclude aspects of our community because we want to paint a better picture. We need to understand they're part of our community. We need to work together to repair those flaws and create greater texture for everybody.
This is a great, I love what you just said. This is a great spot just to take another quick break.
Yep.
And we'll come right back and we'll close off, and I got a few more questions for you. So we'll be right back right after these messages.
We live in a world of conversations. Conversations about life and survival. On a daily basis, mankind continually seeks a way to make our human experience better on all levels. We seek a way forward. Permit me to invite you to one of such conversations happening right here in Kamloops. On the 22nd of September 2023, a prestigious event will be held. AIM Canada Mentorship Society and Mastermind Studios are putting together a special fundraising dinner towards the production of a documentary film series titled Finding a Way Forward. The documentary series will periscope the crisis storm in our community, including homelessness, mental health, drug overdose, crime, and communication breakdown. Guest speaker is the Executive Director of the Canadian Mental Health Association in Kamloops, Mr. Alfred Achoba. Music will be provided by the virtuoso himself, Jeremy Heighton. You will also witness a thought-provoking art installation titled Not All Dolls Live in Houses from the talented Isa Jessica Jordan. Don't miss out on the mouth-watering dinner, which will be a Greek buffet with vegan options and lots of refreshments to nourish us. Bring your family, neighbors, bring your friends to this fundraising dinner in support of community mentorship and the development of a Kamloops-focused documentary film series to find a way forward. Date again is Friday, 22nd of September, 2023. Venue is the Kamloops United Church. Doors open at 5:30 p.m. for a 6 p.m. start. Limited tickets available, so grab yours today. To get tickets, go to www.aimcanadalegacyfund.ca/events. For ourselves, our children, our community, let's find a way forward together.
Have you ever considered launching a professional video podcast? Or creating a video-based interview, but felt daunted by the task? You may have wondered how to begin, how many cameras you need, who to interview, what to say, what kind of film set do you need, lighting, sound, what editing to use, and how to attract viewers or listeners. Did you know that Mastermind Studios can produce 4 to 8 video podcast shows in a single day, complete with recording, editing, and distribution? Contact us now for your free consultation. Let's explore the possibilities. We can work together to turn your maybe into a resounding yes. Give me a call. mastermindstudios.ca. Give us a call right now, 250-574-6902. And if you've made it this far in this podcast, thank you for sticking with us and spending the time to learn more and understand more about the crises that we face. You're watching the Crisis Storm, and if you haven't already, make sure that you hit the subscribe, hit the like, share it with others. We are talking with Jeremy Heighton from the Northshore Business Improvement Association about impacts on business and the economy from the crises we face in community with homelessness, addictions, mental health. Jeremy, what can businesses do with regards to their interactions, employees, business owners, their interactions with homeless people, people suffering with mental health issues in the community? What can they do?
This is a question we're asked almost daily, right? What can I do here? Where can I go with it? Well, number one is you can call us because we're always there. Like literally, I'll get in my truck and I'll drive down to wherever one of our members is and deal with it in person. A little while ago, we had the CAP team on the North Shore, and we had a gal who was in front of a business and wouldn't move along, and the business owner was quite upset because they were trying to open the business. And so they phoned us, and I sent the CAP team down. I said, you guys go down and see what you can do. So after about 10 minutes, I get a phone call. Yeah, it's not going well. I'm like, okay, no worries. In my truck, off I go. I go down to where they are. I arrive on the site, and I'm like, where's this gal? She's in the subway getting a cup of water or whatever. And she comes out of the subway, and she looks up at me, she goes, oh, it's you. I went, hey, how are you? She said, I'm good. I said, what you been up to? Oh, and we chat for a little while. And then we talk about, sorry, I understand it's a bit jarring, but, this lady has to open her business and she needs to get going and da-da-da. So we just have a chat. And she's fine. She wanders off 10 minutes later. And so the CAP team, I was talking to them, I'm like, you have to understand that people on the street are not of right mind. And that could be for a variety of reasons. Many people on the street don't sleep at night. It's dangerous. So you're finding somebody on your doorstep at 7 a.m. and they're exhausted. And I don't know about you, but when I haven't slept or when I'm exhausted, I tend to not be at my best, right? There used to people walking up to them and kicking them or spitting them or yelling at them or, conflict. So they used to conflict right out of the gate. So they're already defensive before you even get started. They may be in an altered state of mind. Got to be a little careful about how you enter that situation. I said, so I have a four-step process. And step number one is be kind. So when I walk up to people who are in front of a business, I'll touch them. Hey, you okay? You okay? Hey, you all right? And they'll come around and be like, what? I'm like, checking to make sure you're okay. I don't know what kind of state you're in, just making sure you're all right. Oh, yeah, I'm okay. All right, be calm, right? Because if you elevate, get out of here, then they elevate, right? Because they're being woken up, hopefully, out of some kind of a sleep. They'll escalate. So you need to be calm. Hey, you know what? I got to open my business in half an hour. I really need you to move along because my customers won't want to come into my business while you're here. Be calm. So be kind, be calm. Chances are, if you're just waking up, you're not going to be the most efficient at getting up and getting out of the way. So be firm. Come out a couple of times. Talk to them a couple of times. Hey man, 10 minutes, I'm opening up. Come on, what are we doing? And if you can't get action, then call. Right? Ask for help. So be kind, be calm, be firm, ask for help. That's it. So when you approach people, understand they're in a different state of mind, just by its very nature. So just consider how you would like to be woken up, how you would like to be asked to move along, what kind of interactions you would like to see, and do that. And then if you can't get anything out of it, sometimes it happens, then you call somebody. You call Business Watch for the CSOs, you call RCMP if there's a threat. You call me, I come down in my truck and we, talk about whatever. Call for some help. You're not alone, and I think that's a really tough part for some business owners. They really feel alone. And what we keep saying is you're not alone, but you also need to be strategic. You need to think about how you move into these relationships, because the more jarring that first point is, the more dysfunctional the whole thing is, all the way down from in the interaction. So you just need to start it on the right foot. And if you start it on the right foot, chances are you move people through the process. And like I say, this gal comes out and goes, "Hey, how are you?" Right? She knows who I am because I've been kind to her. I've spoken to her with respect. I've treated her well, and she now knows I'm not a threat. She knows I'm a decent guy who's just trying to, do what I need to do. And it's got a whole different outcome. So until we have an effective place for these people to go, until we have an integrated access hub or somewhere where people have a destination, we have to do the best job we can of managing the situation and being kind and compassionate within that framework.
You've brought up a lot of great ideas. But of course, we're talking about the economy. We're talking about business.
Yep.
And so thinking about things from a business perspective.
Yep.
You have to have more return on investment coming out than you have money being spent, or it's not sustainable.
Correct.
Right? Your suggestions, just on healthcare alone,
They're massive.
have got to be expensive.
Oh, absolutely.
We're talking about a lot more money being spent, not just on housing,
Exactly.
but on a complete tear down and rebuilding of our healthcare system.
That's right.
That's an expensive proposition.
Absolutely is.
Who the hell's going to pay for that?
Well, and it's interesting because just recently the U.S. went through their debt ceiling issue, right, and managed to get it through Congress. So there's an eye. I think there's an eye on spending. I think there always has been, especially in current inflationary times. There really is. However, the reality is that if constituents, taxpayers, see a vision, if you have a clear vision as a leader, you have a clear pathway delineated, you can articulate the short-term pain and the long-term gain. I honestly believe the majority of taxpayers will get behind you. One of the biggest things we're missing in elections right now is vision, is clarity of purpose. Why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? So the reality is absolutely correct. In the short term, we're going to have some pain. It's going to be a tax lift. It's going to be you go into debt more as government. I don't know. But in the long run, when we look 10 years out, the cost, the taxation on those systems from the government perspective is way different because the needs are diminishing as you move towards that end point. So yes, we're going to have pain here. And I know it sounds like you're kicking the can down the road, but you're not. You're building a new system which requires initial investment. And here's what I'll tell you, because a lot of people say, "Oh, don't spend the money." China's Belt and Roads program, Africa, Asia, etc. China put all the money up front, and guess what's the most strengthened economy in the world right now? Pretty much China. They're right up there. But you know what? Lots of front-end investment, right? And now it yields returns later on. And I think that's what people will need to see. Is there a goal? Is there a plan? Is there a strategy here? Or is this just a game of Wack-A-Mole with the taxpayer, right? That's, I think, what it is we see these programs, but they're not connected to any future state. They're like, oh, we're going to do this today. Oh, we're going to do that tomorrow. Oh, you're going to elect us again? Let's do that and that and that, right? What's the 30-year vision? What do we want our community to look like? What do we want our country to look like? If we have to invest now, let's invest now, but let's work our way through a plan where we pay that investment back over time. Let's create an intelligent plan. Because if you do that right, yes, you have significant upfront investment, but the ROI in the back end is 10 times. You look at dollars invested in housing, it's something like 16-to-1 return on investment. Yeah, there's a cost up front, but the return on that investment in the long term is much greater. So you have to think about it in a different way. It's not just about what's my tax bill today. It's about, are we as a province or as a nation prepared to go into a little more debt, a little bit more, in order to fund a systemic redefinition with the understanding that 10 years from now, we will yield so many other rewards from that. And then part of that process is a systemic full review on a regular basis. Are we still being efficient? Now that money's starting to show up again in these systems, are we blowing that money, or are we investing it in an appropriate way? You know, the government of BC recently made a lot of announcements around end of year surpluses. There were two options in that situation. Option number one, pay down debt. Option number two, announce a whole bunch of new programs. They went with the new programs. Is that the right idea? I don't know if that's the right path. But you know, there's an example. What do you do with that money? And if you're partway down that path and you're starting to see return, to my way of thinking, you pay back the debt, right? So you use the benefits later to repay the legacy challenges. It's a bit tricky, but it all starts with the vision. Like I say, a leader without a vision is just on a nice walk.
Great thoughts. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, so the reality is when I'm asked where we go from here, where do we move to, there's a couple of things that come to mind. So the first and foremost is we have to stop beating each other up. We have to stop, beating up council and beating up people who run agencies and beating up the homeless. And we have to stop beating each other down. And instead, we need to start lifting each other up. We need to find ways, if we have concerns about the way ASK is operated or CMHA is operated, let's go and sit down and talk about those issues and find a path to resolution. When you look at Sparrow House, Genesis, Moira on the North Shore, we have almost zero issues with any of them. That's because we sit down on a regular basis and talk to the operator. If something's going on, we pick up the phone and we address it. We have to start working in a more collaborative environment. And that means that when we come to the table, we have to yell less and listen more. We have to look at the bigger picture and say, how do we figure out what's going on? I've asked the city a number of times for a gap analysis. I've asked Interior Health for a gap analysis. I've asked the province for a gap analysis. Like, what do we have here? What exactly do we have here? Where does CMHA fit? Where does Ask Wellness fit? Where does Mustard Seed fit? Where does IH fit? We don't really know. I mean, we kind of know, and they kind of work together. But how can we come together? Have a health forum. Talk about the gaps. Talk about filling those gaps and making a continuum. How do we pull people together? How do we create synergy? How do we, instead of diminishing our society, challenging our forward momentum, how do we now go to, yes, let's go there. Yes, let's talk about how to make that better. Yes, let's move forward arm in arm. When I'm on the radio with Brett Menier and he says to me, a lot of people are critical of council. Last council did nothing. Last council, what a waste of time. Last council was unbelievably responsive. They worked so hard. They're limited legally. Like, from a liability point of view, they are legally limited under the community charter on what they can do. They towed that line the whole way through the last council. This council has picked up that ball and run with it even further. So instead of beating them up, how do we help them? How do we help them move through policy recommendations to province, the UBCM Mayor's Caucus, or the Southern Interior Legislative Association? How do we move together with the Chamber of Commerce and BIA-BC? How do we get ministers to the table to have the conversation? 4 years ago, David Eby didn't even know BIA-BC existed. A month ago, he was the keynote speaker at our conference, talking about partnerships with us. We move forward positively, strategically, and in concert with others, because we believe the only way to move through this is together in a positive and productive manner.
That's awesome. If you could leave people with one closing thought, something that you would like them to really, really ponder, what is it?
Think, listen, be aware. Like, really think about what you're reading online. Listen to people who know. And be aware of your own biases and predispositions on issues. And try and find a way to balance those, to balance those three pieces. Because if you are educated and informed, you have passion plus data, and that creates better decision making. Instead of reacting, instead of beating each other up, listen, take some time, do some research, think. Don't just go to, this is the website I always follow, so I'm just going to listen to what they say. Look at the other side. Consider, could they be right? Is there balance between these two? There's two sides to every coin, and yet there's a lip right in the middle, right? So just think about it and be strategic about it.
Awesome. Jeremy, thank you.
My pleasure.
You've been watching Crisis Storm with Jeremy Heighton, talking about impacts on business and the economy in our community, from homelessness, substance use, mental health. Join us next time as we have Bill Sandhu, former justice, human rights activist and lawyer, talking to us about a broken justice system and corrections and what might be able to be done about it. Again, subscribe, like, share, and we thank you for watching Crisis Storm.